Most of the past 24 hours, Atlanta has been a city on the edge of its seat. First, a search, then possible evidence, then questioning of a man. But it's apparently gone nowhere, at least not yet.
Mark Picard has been with the story since it began developing more than 24 hours ago. Some of that time was spent inside the man's house with the mother and then with the son and father after they returned from FBI headquarters. Mark, you have seen this story take some strange twist over the night.
Monica, from the moment the Special Task Force walked out of the house with an armful of apparent evidence to the news conference called by the man released from custody, this story has developed in a way that could only be compatible with the bizarre nature of the special investigation itself. Things began to get interesting around 9:30 last night when the FBI agents and the representative of the Special Task Force emerged from a house in northwest Atlanta. They had executed a court-approved search warrant and came away with items they hoped to link with evidence collected at some of the crime scenes. Things like purple and yellow cloth, a piece of yellow blanket, a piece of green carpet fiber, purple thread, and dog hairs. We soon learned that the 23-year-old man who lived with his parents in the house had been taken into custody by the FBI around 3 Wednesday afternoon. After 12 hours of interrogation, Public Safety Commissioner Lee Brown told waiting reporters that the man had been released and no arrest made.
In terms of our efforts tonight, we have not ended up with the information that would result in an arrest. That's about all we have to say at this point in time. We're not holding anyone.
Nobody's under arrest.
That is correct.
Is he still being arrested at this time?
No, he is not.
Has he been released? Is he gone?
But he's free to leave whatever he wants to leave.
What the reporters on hand did not know was that Brown was creating a diversion for the man and his father to leave the building. While they may have left relatively undetected, they were met by a crowd of reporters at their home. I had been invited inside by the man's mother and spoke to the family about the ordeal and the questions of guilt or innocence that were being raised. At 7 a.m., 3.5 hours after returning home, the young man conducted a news conference, setting the condition that he would not be shown and that his name not be used. You will hear him, but you will see reporters and photographers. He contended that he was being harassed prior to his detainment, intimidated during his custody, and pressured to confess to crimes he says he did not commit.
They openly said, "You killed Nathaniel Cater, and you know it, and you're lying to us." They said that. And they said it on a number of occasions. They said it on that night. One of the task force captains on the scene pointed his finger at me and said it, and said he was tired of all the BS about working the long hours, working the stakeouts, and that he was ready to pull the thing to an end.
The man contends he was detained 2 weeks ago near the Chattahoochee River because he was at the wrong place at the wrong time but had done nothing wrong. He also admitted volunteering to take a polygraph test 3 times during his interrogation. According to him, the examiner said he had answered key questions deceptively, but the man insists he did not fail the test. And so the man is free. It is expected that while the evidence collected is examined by the state crime lab, he will be kept under surveillance.
The man questioned by police last night was first confronted by investigators exactly 2 weeks ago. At the time, police were staking out several spots along the Chattahoochee River, including bridges where it was believed a body could be dumped into the water. The man who has been questioned was stopped late at night on May 21st after arousing the curiosity of police on a river stakeout. The investigators heard a splash in the water underneath the Jackson Parkway bridge. They found the man picked up last night driving along the road there very slowly. After following for a while, they stopped and questioned him. He claims he was driving slowly across the bridge because he was trying to read directions to a business appointment he had set up for the first thing in the morning. Despite that explanation, police began tailing the man and dragging the river beneath the Jackson Parkway bridge. 3 days later, on May 24th, the body of Nathaniel Cater was found less than a mile downstream from the Jackson Parkway bridge. He had been dead for 3 days. Police have been all over the neighborhood where the man questioned last night lives. Passers-by say investigators made little effort to hide themselves.
I noticed 2 policemen stopping cars, and as I slowed down, the policeman asked me to stop and asked me for my license. And he checked my tag, and I asked him what was going on, because it looked like a lot of stuff was going on at the time.
And the man picked up last night says he knew investigators were watching his every move. He did not know that they had also placed a device on his car so they could keep constant track of him. It is interesting that on May 27th, while the surveillance was underway, Commissioner Lee Brown met with his top staff. He is quoted as saying at that meeting that there were no solid leads in the child cases.
Keep in mind that when you have an ongoing investigation that has not been solved, there's a great deal of difficulty for anyone to say with a certainty that no one will be talked to again. That's the position we find.
Good evening, I'm Dave Michaels.
And I'm Scott Newell. After nearly 2 years, an arrest. Atlanta police today charged 23-year-old Wayne Williams with murdering one of the 28 young blacks who have been killed since July of 1979. This is the only arrest in the unsolved murders, and police won't say if Williams may face other charges. John Sherrick is live at the Fulton County Jail with the latest. John?
We've been hearing since the end of last week that police might be making an arrest sometime this weekend. But we've heard that kind of reliable speculation about an impending arrest before, especially since police first questioned Wayne Williams earlier this month. But now it's happened. Wayne Williams is inside the Fulton County Jail tonight, charged with murder. And despite all of the attention he's been getting, his arrest caught nearly everyone by surprise. Wayne Bertram Williams moved freely in his yard this weekend, probably unaware of how close he was to becoming Atlanta's first official suspect in the city's plague of unsolved murders. Police had been watching Williams continually for 4 weeks, ever since questioning him in connection with the latest murder. His impending arrest was a secret to all but the highest-level investigators. So late Sunday afternoon, when a small group of plainclothed officers took him away from his home, even the police surveillance team was surprised. An hour after the arrest, with Williams locked inside the Fulton County Jail, the top task force brass could make their arrest public knowledge.
At approximately 5 p.m. this date, Wayne Williams, who is a black male, aged 23 years of age, was taken into custody on an arrest warrant charging him with the criminal homicide of Mr. Nathaniel Cater.
But why arrest Williams now? What new evidence do police have they didn't have during the 4 weeks they've kept Williams under surveillance? Police sources conflict. One investigator tells us police have no direct evidence against Williams that they didn't have weeks ago, that task force authorities move now because of pressure from other police agencies. Another source tells Associated Press police do now have solid evidence based on new crime lab tests. Public Safety Commissioner Lee Brown wouldn't say.
As you know, we meet on this on a day-to-day basis. As a result of the meetings we've had today, the decision was made to issue the arrest warrant, which was done, and he was taken into custody as a result of that.
Is he going to be charged with any other murders? Will there be any
This time he's been charged with one account of homicide, that of Mr. Nathaniel Cater.
Is there a possibility there will be other charges?
That's something that is not to be discussed at this time. We have one charge he's being held on at this time.
The investigation in the other 27 cases is continuing then?
The investigation shall continue full steam ahead as before.
Jail sources tell 11 Live News that at least 2 weeks ago, police ordered a special cell built for Williams, a cell more secure, more inaccessible than even the one built for the man who was arrested for killing Mrs. Martin Luther King Sr. And here, Wayne Williams will stay. He'll stay here without bond, at least until he gets a chance for a commitment hearing, probably within the next day or so. If a judge at that hearing decides the evidence in the case is sufficient, then there will be a grand jury hearing, then possibly pre-trial hearings. All of that before a trial could begin. Commissioner Brown says all of those public court proceedings will reveal the exact justification police had for issuing the arrest warrant.
Well, no more murders have been added to the task force list since Wayne Williams was first brought in for questioning on June 4th. His murder charge results from the last killing to be reported. It was the death of Nathaniel Cater. Neil Craig has that part of the story.
A stretch of the Chattahoochee River in northwest Atlanta was the location of the first apparent encounter between the law and Wayne Williams. Stakeout officers thought they heard a splash in the water. When Williams was stopped, he said he'd been looking for the address of a girl. Following questioning, Williams was released but may have been followed. Within 2 days, Nathaniel Cater's body washed up on the riverbank. Cater, at 28, was the oldest in the string of murder victims. He was also the largest at 5'10", 150 pounds. He was probably intoxicated at the time of death. The discovery of Cater's body led to still another theory about all the baffling killings.
I do not believe at this point, based upon what we know, that there is a random picking up of people. What we have to determine is what is that characteristic that tie everyone together.
Nathaniel Cater lived in an apartment complex less than a mile from Wayne Williams' parents' home. Also in Cater's building lived 7-year-old LaTanya Wilson, a murder victim last October. Also living there was 15-year-old Cynthia Montgomery, another victim of a killing. However, she was not added to the official list. Wayne Williams' home became the target of police and media stakeouts following his questioning by FBI agents. For most of a week, lawmen and news crews watched each other watching the house. Lawyers for Wayne Williams went into federal court with claims of invasion of privacy. They wanted the media to back off the story, and they asked law enforcement officials to plug up leaks of information. An immediate temporary restraining order was not granted. The judge said she might rule early this week. It's up to the court to decide if the issue is now moot.
Prosecutors now have the task of building a case against Williams. While much of the evidence by itself may not be conclusive, investigators are hoping that together it may be enough for a conviction.
No one would have believed on the afternoon of July 28, 1979, that the discovery of 2 bodies on Niskey Lake Road in southwest Atlanta would have signaled the beginning of a nightmare. But it did. A nightmare that has lasted 23 months, claimed 28 young lives, and now has resulted in at least 1 arrest. Throughout the investigation, law enforcement officials have said that physical evidence was the only thing, aside from a confession, that could guarantee a conviction. The physical evidence in this case has been of a wide variety. Fibers found on the bodies of at least 7 victims were of the same variety found in Williams' home. Human blood samples taken from the suspect's car matched the same type blood as at least one of the victims. But state crime lab tests were all inconclusive. The fibers were too common, or the blood type shared by too many people. But there were other connections. Wayne Williams organized a singing group, Gemini, and used a Georgia Avenue restaurant as a mailing address for that group, the same restaurant where 2 of the victims worked. At the Challenge School, which 2 other victims attended, classmates recognized Williams as a man they had frequently seen in downtown homosexual hangouts. At the Silver Dollar Saloon downtown, patrons said they'd seen Williams as well. Another frequent customer was 27-year-old Nathaniel Cater. While sources say police have never been able to prove that Williams knew Cater personally, Williams is nevertheless, tonight, charged with Cater's murder.
News of the arrest spread quickly throughout Atlanta, the country, and the world, but nowhere were the people more interested than in one northwest part of the city.
It was while the kids were playing outside these Dixie Hills apartments that word of the arrest reached Nathaniel Cater's father.
Well, I just feel very sorry for my son, and I just hope it'll stop some of this killing,
Were you surprised at all by this news?
Yes, I really was surprised at it being, him, but I hope it'll stop some of this, killing now.
Alonzo Cater says he'll keep a close eye on what happens in this case. So will the neighbors of Wayne Williams, who live just a few blocks away from Mr. Cater. The area around the Williams house on Penelope Road has looked like this since 3 weeks ago when Williams was questioned at length by police. The neighbors have gotten used to all this, but are looking forward to some quiet.
It's going to take some time to get over this really seriously. Because we respect neighbors out here. And although it still got to be proven. And it really was a shock to me.
About 2.5 hours after Wayne Williams was arrested, Williams' father passed news people, preferring not to say anything.
Even though most of the neighbors agree that the arrest should reduce the number of news people and police in this neighborhood, it certainly wasn't true tonight. There was a parade of cars and people coming in here, sightseers. They were all curious to see what they'd heard about on the 6 o'clock news.
Many of these people came from several miles away just to see what was going on.
I just wanted to see, I've never been over here to see, the cops, watching this house. And I said, well, let's go by and see it.
But there is some relief in this neighborhood, at least that the Wayne Williams case has taken a definite turn, which still has a way to go.
So I'm not going to say this is going to relieve everybody. We won't know, for some time to come.
There is always speculation about someone arrested in a case such as this one. Who is this person, his upbringing, his background? Here's a look at Wayne Williams.
Wayne Williams has a familiar face. Members of the news media and police department who've watched him over these last 2 weeks came in contact with him long before the child murders came into the news. Williams was always interested in the news media. During the last several years, he has chased ambulances going to the scene of hundreds of crimes, shooting news film and selling it to local TV stations. He was even arrested 5 years ago for impersonating a police officer when he rushed to the scene of a crime with red lights flashing in the front of his car. He was ambitious and aggressive, considered a whiz in radio electronics since he was very young. He once held a job as a freelance producer for WGST News Radio. His interest in radio dated back to his school years. At Frederick Douglass High School, he was considered an excellent student with an IQ of 150. He was considered by many of his friends to be a genius in math and science. State Legislator Tyrone Brooks was shocked when he was implicated in the cases.
He's a perfect kid. I don't believe it.
Lately, Williams has been working as a music promoter. A few days after he was questioned by police in the death of Nathaniel Cater, he talked to the news media. He wouldn't allow his picture to be taken, but he did talk about the crime police believed he might have committed.
They openly said, you killed Nathaniel Cater, and you know it, and you're lying to us. They said that. And they said it on a number of occasions. They said it on that night. One of the task force captains on the scene pointed his finger at me and said it, and said he was tired of all the BS about working the long hours, working the stakeouts, and that he was ready to pull the thing to an end. And they said that a number of times. I'm asking for a public apology from the FBI or whoever was responsible for leaking this information to the news media.
23-year-old Wayne Williams, freelance photographer and music promoter, a familiar face to police and the news media, was not to get an apology. The child genius is under arrest and charged with the murder of 28-year-old Nathaniel Cater.
I'm so glad to hear it, but I sure hope they find out who did the other killings. That's the reaction of Linda Weiss tonight to the arrest of Wayne Williams. Her son Aaron had been found murdered in DeKalb County last year. For Willie Mae Mathis, the ordeal has been even more agonizing. For almost a year, her son Jeffrey had been missing. His body was found finally in March. Mrs. Mathis has been active in the mothers groups for some time, and she is with us tonight. Mrs. Mathis, how do you feel now that there's finally been what appears to be a break in the case?
Well, I'm very optimistic that this, that they have something concrete now. And I do believe that they do have something concrete about this guy. But even if he's charged with the murder of Cates and not charged with the other murders, what about the other 27? And we still have somebody out there that's killing and still loose. But I think strongly, very strongly, that they have something now to work on, at least. They have something to work on, something to start on, and I'm very pleased with it. It's happening today. Today, Jeffrey would have been 12 years old.
Mrs. Mathis, what were your thoughts when they first questioned Wayne Williams back a little over 2 weeks ago?
Well, I didn't want them to just get somebody and charge them with the killings of these kids just to get the case over with and just say that I have somebody. I'm glad that they waited and was positive in what they were doing.
Mrs. Mathis, have you talked to any of the other mothers tonight?
No.
So you don't know how they feel at all?
No, but I'm pretty sure they feel the same way that I do.
Do you think this man could get a fair trial in this city?
I hope he will get a fair trial in any city. But I feel sorry for him, and if he's convicted of this Cates murder, I just said, God have mercy on his soul.
Wayne Williams is spending the night in the Fulton County Jail. His first hearing should come tomorrow morning. John Shurik is live at the jail with some information on security there. John.
As we mentioned earlier in the newscast, Fulton County jailers have had a special section of the jail prepared for police to bring in some suspect in the investigation. Chief Jailer Nick Eason, how is Wayne Williams' confinement different from that of any other inmate tonight?
It's not any different. He's in the jail.
But you told me earlier that he has some special security involved in the section of the jail that he's in.
No, I said he was going to have constant observation.
24-hour surveillance still.
That's right.
Chief, the process now continues to a commitment hearing. What legally is that commitment hearing? When does it have to take place, for example?
I don't know exactly. That's a technicality of law. I understand it's within 72 hours after the arrest.
And what happens at the commitment hearing? What is it legally?
Well, it's an arrangement that they've construed that each inmate is entitled to. We at the jail, we're responsible for the security, the welfare, and, the safety of these inmates.
Now, at a commitment hearing, bond is taken up. The bond is determined if there should be bond. Could there, under Georgia law, be a bond for a murder suspect?
That would be left to the discretion of the court.
So conceivably, Wayne Williams could be out on some kind of bond if the judge determines that to be right for the case.
Well, if the judge so ruled, why, yes, he could be out on bond.
Chief Nick Easton, thank you very much.
And John, police have maintained all along that there may be several people involved in the killings. What about that side of the story?
Police have always insisted that they should treat all of the cases separately, partly because so many of the victims died in different ways. The first victim, who was Edward Hope Smith, was found shot to death, that in July of 1979. The 11th victim, Anthony Carter, was found stabbed to death. Most of the victims have been asphyxiated in one way or another. The bodies of many other victims, we may never know how they died because they were found so long after they died. If for no other reason, because of the different methods of death, that's why police still believe there is more than one suspect. And as Commissioner Brown said earlier today, the task force is moving full speed ahead on those 27 unsolved murders.
In a 2-year reign of terror 30 years ago, Williams was linked to the killing of more than 24 children abducted from the streets and murdered in Atlanta. The memories are still fresh for many Atlanta residents, especially those in the African-American community whose children were being killed. Now, Williams is serving 2 life sentences. Jack Mallard was the lead prosecutor in the Williams case tonight. There were 28 male victims that were on that list that were possibly linked to Williams, but he was only convicted for the 2 older ones, the adults. Why is that?
All right, we looked at each of the cases, and in doing so, we noticed that we had more evidence against those 2 that were charged, Cater and Payne. Mm-hmm. We had to look at it from a legal viewpoint. Would the conviction stand up on appeal? Because if we charged in, say, 10 or 15 or 20 even, and I believe a jury may have convicted on that many, still, if there's not enough evidence from a legal viewpoint, then the appellate courts will overturn it.
So you think a jury would have convicted on the 28, you said? You think they would have? Really?
No, not on 28.
Yeah.
I said as many as 15 or 20.
As many as 15 or 20. Right. So, but people want to know why were they weren't dropped.
No.
You said they just weren't brought to trial.
That's right.
And just because you didn't feel, you felt the evidence was stronger on the 2 adults.
Yes. A prosecutor has to look at it not only from a viewpoint of, well, let's solve the case, and I believe a jury will convict, so let's indict him and try it. We have to look at it down the road, 5 years, 10 years, when it's in the appellate courts. Will the evidence sustain that conviction from a legal viewpoint when it's in the appellate courts? And we felt like at that time there was not enough sufficient evidence to charge, convict, and keep the conviction down the line.
When you were watching that interview, did it seem like the same man, that you came across during questioning back in the 80s,
yes,
1982?
Yes, he hadn't changed. He hadn't changed.
Yeah.
He was on the stand 3 days, and he was a wily character, smart, articulate the first 2 days, and he controlled himself the 3rd day. He went into a tantrum.
That's what I want to go into that, because he talked about it. There was a part during cross-examination where he had an outburst, and you believe that was one of the things that convicted him, was this outburst. He talked about it in our interview, and I want to show you how he characterized it, and then we'll talk about it.
I was probably my own worst enemy. I was an arrogant, bus-headed idiot at the time, and I played right into these people's hands. I could see almost the shock in the jurors' faces if they said, "My God, is this the same Wayne that was up here yesterday?" I could see that.
How important was that moment in his conviction?
everybody thinks that the Williams as a witness is what lost the case for him. The evidence is what lost the case for him. That was an important moment, however. The examination and how a defendant does on the stand is very important to a jury because they've got to have enough evidence to convict him. But he helped convict him.
Looking back so many years and looking at that interview that Soledad did, what did you learn? Did you learn anything different, anything new?
Well, I learned at the end of the program when Soledad confronted him that he was speechless. And I learned that was in addition to everything else I'd ever known about Williams. That I didn't know.
Yeah. Well, it's very interesting, and I was around living in Louisiana not far from here, and this terrified me, and it's Jack Mallard.